Sufi influence on Ottoman leadership. Aziz Mahmud Hüdayi, 1541–1628, was the most influential Sufi master in Ottoman history. His journey to becoming a great Sufi master, leaving behind a life of luxury and a position of power, began with a mysterious event. A poor man claimed to have made the pilgrimage to Mecca, more than 2,300 kilometers from Bursa, in just a few days. More about that shortly in the course of the story. Hudayi lived through the reigns of 6 sultans, 4 of whom were deeply connected to him and held him in high regard. They sought his guidance on critical matters, whether personal or related to state affairs. The Sultans Mourad the Third, Ahmed the First, Osman the Second, and Mourad the Fourth sought his advice. Sultan Ahmed the First, in particular, was one of his most loyal disciples. Hudayi was the one who girded Sultan Mourad the Fourth with the sword during the coronation ceremony. In the Ottoman Empire, events were recorded with such meticulous detail that almost everything deemed important, from items entering the palace to events involving sultans, princes, prominent commanders, and statesmen, was documented. Much of the mysterious and unusual information you'll hear in this video comes from these archival records. Many statesmen, commanders, and princes had close relationships with Sufi masters, who were believed to possess the ability to perform miracles, as supported by records. Most Ottoman sultans maintained these connections throughout their reigns, and some of these masters wielded considerable influence over both the sultans and other statesmen. From legal and political authority to Sufism. When Mahmud Hüdayi was 33 years old, he came to Bursa with his teacher Nazazada. He served as a professor at the Ferhadi Madrasa for 3 years. After the passing of his teacher, he was appointed as the judge, the Qadi, of the city Bursa. The Qadis of that time were also the head of the city, like the mayor in our time. While serving as a Qadi, Mahmud Hüdayi had a dream one night where he saw hell and recognized some people he knew burning in its fire. It is reported that he was not only disturbed by the horror and sadness this dream caused, but he was further shaken by a legal case brought by a woman shortly thereafter, which led him to resign from his position as a judge. The event unfolded as follows. At that time in Bursa, there was a revered Sufi master named Muhammad Uftada, who was devoted to the spiritual guidance of the people. A poor man who greatly admired Uftada desperately wished to go on pilgrimage, Hajj, each year, but he never had the money to fulfill this wish. This caused him great sorrow, and he would spend his days staring longingly at the road where pilgrims would depart. His wife was equally saddened by her husband's constant grief. One year, when the pilgrimage season came around again and the poor man was once more unable to go, he was overwhelmed by his despair and said to his wife in frustration that if he doesn't go to Hajj that year, that he has divorced his wife with 3 talaqs. A severe form of divorce in Islamic law, which becomes valid simply through verbal declaration. As the days passed and the time for the pilgrimage drew near, the poor man became increasingly distressed. He hadn't managed to borrow the money needed to go on the pilgrimage, and if he didn't go, his wife would automatically be divorced. In his desperation, he thought of the great Sufi master Uftada and went to him, tearfully explaining his situation. Uftada advised him, "Go to our friend, Askiji Mourad Dede, and give him my greetings. He will take you to Hajj and ease your burden." Filled with hope, the man rushed to Askiji Mourad Dede's store, delivered Uftada's greetings, and explained his predicament. Mourad Dede told him, "Close your eyes. Do not open them until I tell you to." When the poor man finally opened his eyes, he found himself standing in Mecca. Through the grace of Allah, Mourad Dede showed a miracle and transported him there in a very short time. It was the day of Arafat, and the pilgrims were gathered on the plain of Arafat. The poor man and Mourad the Third put on their ihrams, the white garments worn during Hajj, and joined the pilgrims. The next day, they performed the rites at the Kaaba, visited the holy sites, and met with other pilgrims from Bursa. The other pilgrims were overjoyed to see their fellow townsmen, Mourad the Third and the poor man. The poor man bought a few small gifts and entrusted some of them to his neighbors who were also on the pilgrimage to bring back to Bursa. After completing the pilgrimage, they returned to Bursa in the same manner. When the poor man returned home after a few days with the gifts he had brought from Mecca, his wife refused to let him in, saying, "Didn't you divorce me? How dare you bring me gifts and try to enter the house?" The poor man replied, "I went to Hajj and brought these gifts from Mecca." But the woman, accusing him of lying, said, "How can you travel to Hajj and back in just a few days? I will take you to court." She filed a case with the judge, Mahmud Hüdayi, saying, "O Qadi, I can no longer live with this man. I want our marriage annulled. He was in Bursa just 2 days before Eid, and yet he claims to have gone to Hajj, climbed Mount Arafat, and brought back Zamzam water from Mecca. He is deceiving me and has even found a false witness. He is claiming that Askiji Mourad the Third was with him and saw everything." Upon hearing this, Qadi Mahmud summoned the husband and listened to his defense. The poor man insisted that he had indeed performed the pilgrimage, circumambulated the Kaaba, visited the holy sites, and even met with other pilgrims from Bursa to whom he had entrusted some gifts. Therefore, he argued that the divorce had not taken place. The poor man also presented Askiji Mourad the Third as a witness. When Askiji Mourad the Third appeared in court, he noticed that the judge was finding it hard to believe the story. He said, "O judge, Satan, though an enemy of Allah, can travel across the world in an instant. Why is it hard to believe that a friend of Allah can go to the Kaaba in the blink of an eye?" The judge was astonished and postponed the case until the pilgrims returned from Hajj. When the pilgrims from Bursa returned, they testified in court that the poor man had indeed completed the pilgrimage and had even entrusted them with gifts to bring back. With this testimony, Qadi Mahmud rejected the woman's request for an annulment, and the couple's marriage remained intact. Once a judge, now a liver seller in Bursa. The recent event weighed heavily on Judge Mahmud Hüdayi's mind, deeply affecting him for several days. Finally, he approached Mourad the Third and said, "I have come to ask you to accept me as your student." Askiji Mourad the Third replied, "I cannot fulfill your request, Dada can. Go to him for help." Qadi Mahmud returned home, ordered his servant to prepare his horse, and dressed himself in his finest clothes. Mounted on his horse, with his attendant beside him, he set off for the lodge of Dada. But as he reached the street near the Molafanari Mosque, his horse's hooves became stuck in the rocks, and despite all efforts, the horse could not move forward. It is said that this rock was located in the neighborhood of Qujala. Left with no other option, Qadi Mahmud dismounted from his horse and, still wearing his fine robes, walked to Dada's lodge. When he arrived, he saw a man dressed in tattered clothes working in the garden, tilling the soil. Mistaking this man for a servant, Mahmud Hüdayi said, "I am Mahmud, the judge of Bursa. I wish to see Sheikh Dada. Go and announce my arrival." The man, who was in fact Dada himself, straightened up slightly and said, "Shame on you, O Qadi. You have come to the wrong place. This is the gate of nothingness, and we are humble servants. Yet you are a man of wealth and prestige. How can we ever come together? You have your knowledge, wealth, status, and a flourishing worldly life. We, however, have nothing but Allah. Did not even your horse refuse to come here, its hooves stuck in the rocks? These words struck Mahmud Hüdayi to his core, and tears began to flow from his eyes. Master, I have left everything at the threshold of your blessed door. My only desire is to become your student and serve you. I am ready to do whatever you command, he pleaded sincerely. Uftada, speaking slowly and deliberately, responded, O judge of Bursa! You must give up your position and go into the streets of Bursa, selling liver while wearing your gold-embroidered robe. And every day, you must bring 3 livers to the lodge. True to his word, Qadi Mahmud immediately resigned from his position as judge and began selling liver in the streets of Bursa, calling out, liver for sale. All while still wearing his fine robe. The people of Bursa were bewildered by his behavior, and some mocked him, saying, the judge of Bursa has lost his mind. Despite the ridicule and stares, he persisted, selling liver day after day. Each evening, when he returned to the lodge, Uftada would ask him, how did things go today? Were you able to sell the livers? And Hudayi would recount his experiences. To further humble and purify him, Uftada later assigned him the task of cleaning the lodge's lavatories. One day, as Hudayi was cleaning, he overheard the sound of drums and flutes. Listening closely, he realized that the noise was coming from the procession welcoming the new judge who had been appointed in his place. For a moment, his thoughts wandered, and he thought to himself, so, the new judge is arriving. Mahmud, you poor man, you have given up such a noble profession and now scrub toilets. But as soon as this thought crossed his mind, he snapped back to his senses and scolded himself, Mahmud! Didn't you promise your sheikh that you would trample on your ego? Feeling the weight of his momentary lapse, he threw down his broom and prepared to sweep the floor with his beard because of his repentance. Just as he was about to do so, Uftada appeared at the door and said, Mahmud, my son. The beard is sacred. It is not to be used for such tasks. Our aim was to help you pass this test. With that, Uftada took him inside the lodge. Through his determined rejection of his ego's desires and his complete submission to Uftada's guidance, Mahmud Hüdayi quickly became his master's foremost and most esteemed student. The water heated by the heat of the heart. One morning, Mahmud Hüdayi gave a sign that his spiritual journey had come to its completion and that he was ready to begin guiding others on the path of truth. Every morning, Mahmud Hüdayi would wake up early and prepare warm water for his teacher's ablution. However, on this particular morning, he overslept and woke up just before the last moment. He quickly grabbed the water pitcher, but there was no time to heat the water because he could already hear his teacher's footsteps approaching. Holding the pitcher close to his chest, he stood there, unable to move. Sheikh Uftada then leaned over and said, Come on, my son, pour the water. But Mahmud Hüdayi, still clutching the pitcher, stood frozen, unable to bring himself to pour the cold water onto his teacher's hands. Uftad spoke again, Come on, my son. What are you waiting for? We will be late. Reluctantly and with great hesitation, Mahmud Hüdayi began to pour the water, afraid of causing discomfort to his teacher. To his surprise, his teacher's next words astonished him even more. My dear Mahmud, how warm this water is. You did not heat it with an ordinary fire, but with the fire of your heart. This is a sign that your service has now come to its completion. Muhammad Uftada granted Mahmud Hüdayi his certificate of authorization, the Khilafah, which is his diploma in the science of Tasawwuf, also known as Sufism, and sent him to his childhood home,